Welcome back. So today is Workers' Day, and of course the country finds itself in a state of economic decline and mounting uncertainty for workers. The National Treasury told the Standing Committee on Finance yesterday that there could be between 3 and 7 million job losses as a result of a protracted lockdown. In addition, the future of SAA, almost 5,000 strong workforce, hangs in the balance. Trade unions are up in arms following government's failure to pay this year's annual public sector wage increases, according to a 2018 three-year agreement. COVID-19 is creating a health versus economics contradiction between the need to stay at home for social distancing, while advocacy groups such as the Institute of Race Relations are calling for the scrapping of the lockdown for businesses to resume to avoid a catastrophic economic consequence for millions of South Africans. Let's get a bit of analysis now. Labour analyst joining us on the line, Mamokgethi Molopyane, is with us to talk a bit more. Good to have you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good morning.
So let's get your analysis. What is your analysis at this time of the very different views with regard to lockdown and how it's affecting workers?
Well, workers are always going to be affected more than perhaps companies and more than anybody else in the country because their livelihood has stopped and they are not earning an income. But also the ripple effect of the lockdown on the economy, on their work, is such that many months later, workers will still be suffering the effects. I mean, there isn't a chance that companies or businesses can recover. Companies have economic support systems that are coming from government. However, for workers, they do not get the kind of economic support that is a full pay that is coming from government. But also, often when this a pandemic of such nature, as we are seeing in advanced economies throughout the world, mostly adds to the burden of unemployment, increases the number of those that are unemployed, and it's often difficult. It's going to be difficult to turn around. But overall, in general, broadly speaking, it's quite difficult to tell how this will turn out based on what we are seeing in, for example, the United States, where by the end of March there were 6.6 million people who had applied for their equivalent of the UIF, and already the numbers are going up. We know that it's about 13.5% of the workforce that is now out of work. Based on that, we can then juxtapose it to South Africa and add the existing challenges in South Africa of rising unemployment, of retrenchments that were already happening, but also of an economy that has stagnated and was in a recession. So perhaps here at home, the impact is going to be much more higher than we anticipate, as Treasury also anticipates.
Yeah, I mean, this obviously has been really exacerbated the whole situation of unemployment, the economy, joblessness. We already had an unemployment rate that was very, very high here in South Africa. And I mean, hearing briefings given by Labour ministers and also the respective premiers from the provinces talking to the dramatic job losses that are going to come from this lockdown, it's going to take years for South Africa to recover. But let's look at this Workers' Day. This basically finds the whole labour force and unionists up in arms over wage disputes. What chance do they have at this game right now? I mean, is it looking like a losing game?
It's going to be difficult, but they may take it to the courts, and the court may rule in their favour or not. Because remember, for example, in the public sector wage disagreement that's happening now, this was an agreement that's in place that the government had signed, that was by any ordinary circumstances accepted, and it was ongoing. However, the government, of course, said it cannot pay it, and it's as if the government is breaking the agreement and the rules that it has agreed to. So unions may go to court to seek legal decisions on that, and it might be a very difficult time between the public sector and their employer. And I do not think at this moment, either parties can afford a clash through the courts or a clash through that may end up in further disagreements about the fact that government has failed to honor the agreement that was set in 2018. However, when you have listened to the finance minister, he has made it clear that government does not have the money and it's unsustainable in the long term to continue paying wage increases that at the rate that they are, because government spending has almost spiraled out of control. Well, workers are going to say, well, this is an agreement that's in place. You cannot backtrack on it, and this, as I say, may lead further to further disputes between the employer and the employee, which is unfortunate because the public sector is the biggest employer in the country, but also the public sector unions within COSATU are quite powerful at the moment.
I mean, let's turn our attention now to SAA. I mean, the workforce there, we're talking to close on 5,000 people, not to mention a lot of the other companies that supply services to SAA. I mean, it makes it clear that nothing at this point is cast in stone. But what is the future of job security at this point, if any?
There is no future of job security at SAA. It's very clear in the many engagements that they've had, that the employer has had with workers, but also it's very clear in the crisis, that the deepening crisis of SAA, it seems the position that the government has taken is one of arguably letting go of SAA or restructuring it, and it does not matter how it's restructured. Somehow along the line of that restructuring process, workers will lose their jobs, and they may not keep all the workers. So it's a tricky one, because it comes at a time when SAA has, for the longest time, had financial problems and has had to be bailed out. Now, the pandemic has now, as we are seeing, relocating and shifting resources around. And it's a tough decision that government has to make. But one wonders whether the pandemic has sort of like made a decision, so to speak, for government, because now it has to prioritize where the money goes to. And as we have heard, and we have seen that it's not SAA. It cannot constantly be bailed out, and it burns through money quickly or resources quickly. So there's going to be a dilemma in how government handles this, because it pits government and the workers at COSATU at various unions against the employer, and by right government.
Does this suggest basically a dynamic shift in the country's labour economics, especially for regular workers, their effectiveness and their deployment in the workplace?
Yes, it does. I mean, what we have seen as through this pandemic continues is that companies are also finding ways to come up with new ways of work. So work, as we know, is completely being reconfigured, and it's no longer the way 9 to 5 that is traditional, but it is changing. At the same time, this means that it's going to affect various workers at various levels of various skills and occupations. And for South Africa, often we can expect that often those are going to be the workers of low-skilled skills that are going to be affected the most. However, we know that in some industries, even the highly skilled are going to be displaced as work is changed. And this pandemic really is causing work to change, but also it causes industries to change.
I want to talk to you about your field of expertise, and that, of course, is the mining sector. I mean, I know you have a lot of interest in that. This sector is already being called back to work, while union leaders are weekly protesting the move. Is the working, or are the working conditions safe? You know, I mean, you've got some people that are desperate to go to work and earn a salary because we need to get this economy going, and yet there's that fear that's been instilled in us that coronavirus is a deadly killer. It can kill you, but obviously you can get better at the same time. So we've got these messages coming that are fighting against each other. So let's talk to mining. What about that sector?
Yes, it's a difficult one because workers in South African mining have to go underground in small spaces, mostly working together in small spaces in a close area and are quite close to each other. So it's going to be difficult to observe social distancing. And as such, it's important for mining companies to provide protective personal equipment for workers, which, by the way, mining companies, I think, arguably in South Africa have the capacity to do so, but also they have the capacity to probably test their workers regularly because we know that most mining companies have clinics, have facilities that can enable them to adapt to a new working environment and ensure that the workers' safety and health is prioritized. I think it's going to be critical for the department under Minister Mantashe to ensure and follow through that companies are regularly testing workers as shift changes, as workers go underground, but also that companies are providing workers with much needed mask and protective equipment so that we avoid the possibility of a breakout of it in the mining industry, and which of course can be detrimental because it will spread quite quickly. So this is a catch-22 situation, but also a difficult one because that industry supplies global demands, but also there are some economies globally that are beginning to ease their restrictions. There are some economies and sectors that are beginning to ease certain industries. So in a way, mining mining feels that it has to, the industry feels that it has to work and meet those, because it cannot be. The argument it makes is that we cannot stay closed for long because it's going to affect us in the long run. But we have to remember that they are not operating alone. Other countries that are also in mining and that are consumers of their commodities are also affected by COVID pandemic.
Parting shot from you. There's a lot of disputing views with regard to the lockdown. I mean, it's causing tension, and some institutions, like the Institute for Race Relations, are calling for the entire scrapping of the lockdown and just restart the economy, and everybody must return to work as usual, obviously putting in the safety precautions that have been laid out for us. What is your view?
Well, there's always going to be an element in South Africa that is always going to push or argue that business is important before the health of the people. But I'd like to touch on a point that Minister Blade made yesterday during his briefing, that it's another thing to, yes, put the economy first, but we must always put the safety and the health of the people first. And it's important that government cannot be pressurized to completely scrap the lockdown or open up or completely let go of it. I think the approach that government is taking, that it must be phased, that it must be gradual, that it must be on a test level to see how it's working, and then only then increase it and see how it works out. That is the best approach. Yes, it's difficult because people want to work, but at the same time, we must consider the safety effect of the people. And the economy will always be rebuilt. We know that economies have had recessions, economies have had collapse. There have been the 2009 Great Recession, but economies can always be rebuilt. And I think safety for a country like us that has a high HIV prevalence and so forth, is important that we maintain a measure of control over the lockdown. And I think the phased out, gradual process that government has taken, as advocated by the Minister of Health, is very clear on that, by the way. It's the correct step.
All right, we leave it there. We thank you so much for your views on this Workers' Day. Labour analyst Mamokgethi Molopyane giving us a perspective of South African labour issues amidst these really dramatic economic challenges and uncertainty that faces the country.